Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2. They're called Aftermath and Departure, respectively. This is the premiere of the MonsterVerse TV show that ties in with the Godzilla and King Kong movies that have come out from the US over the past, well, decade almost now. Godzilla was 2014, so yeah, we're almost at a decade of this thing, which feels weird to think about actually. But there's a new one coming out next year. We got Godzilla Cross Kong. It's got a subtitle, I can't remember what that is off the top of my head. But there was Godzilla, there was Kong Skull Island, and then Godzilla King of the Monsters and Godzilla versus Kong up in the movies so far in this universe. And I enjoy the movies to varying degrees. I'll sort of give my background on where I stand with those, but I'll just, to get out of the way, I'll start spoiler free here since it is a new show. I'll give you some warning before I do go into the spoilers and get into it. I did debate splitting these up and just watching the first one and talking about it, but I already split up another double premiere this week, so to make sure I actually fit these in, I'm doing this as a pair. So we'll get into it and we'll talk, because I didn't realize this was out this week. I thought this was still coming in 2024, maybe near when the movie was coming out, and lo and behold, I just discovered the other day that this was premiering with 2 episodes on Apple this week. So yeah, I'll get into what this is. This is a show. Monarch's a group that's in the movies. It's like a secret scientific / military group that is tracking and investigating the monsters that are in this world. They were set up in the Godzilla movie, and they were really explored in the Kong movie, where, you know, John Goodman's character in that was very much about that group, and he was looking into the monsters in Skull Island. And it's been used repeatedly throughout these movies. And this show is set over a big span of time. It starts out, well, I should say, well, there's the present day story, and I'm saying present day kind of in quotes because it's not actually quite present day. It's 2015. It's a couple of years, or 1 year even, after what they're calling in the show as G-Day, which is the day Godzilla and all that stuff happened in San Francisco in the first Godzilla movie from this universe. And we follow some characters in that part of the timeline, but we also follow characters in the 50s before we even get to Kong Skull Island. We get characters who are related between these two eras, and most notably we have both Kurt and Wyatt Russell playing the same character. In the 50s, he's played by Wyatt Russell, the young version of the character, and then his father, Kurt Russell, is playing the older version in 2015, which was one of the big selling points of this show. It was like, okay, it's kind of interesting they're doing a show in this MonsterVerse, but you're telling me Kurt Russell's going to be in it out of nowhere, and that his son's also going to be there playing the same character? That's kind of interesting. So that was definitely one of the big selling points. But, you know, there was a lot of questions going in. It's like, okay, how much of the monster stuff are we actually going to see in a weekly TV show? Even one from Apple, who typically have very expensive looking shows, it's still a lot of money to have Godzilla and other monsters on the screen. So we'll get into that. I mean, the quick answer is there's not a ton of them in these first 2 episodes. You get like 1 or 2 scenes in each episode, pretty much, not including a little bit of footage from some of the movies. And I think that's fair enough. I suspect there's probably going to be a couple of big scenes with monsters later in the season. They've probably got a couple of big money scenes where it's, hey, here's a full scene of monster action that they'll probably do later on. They're probably saving that for maybe the finale, maybe another big random episode in the middle to really blow their budgets on. But by and large, this is a show about the mystery and the human drama and the connections of the characters between the timelines, and exploring the mysteries that they set up that are just related around these things, which is an interesting sales pitch, because typically the humans in these monster movies are the weakest elements of them. So I suppose this is a good point to just sort of give where I stand on all these movies, just so you know my just for my bias, or what lens I'm looking at this through. Like, am I coming into this hating these movies, loving these movies, or somewhere in between? I love Godzilla 2014. I actually think that movie's great. The humans are a bit weak, don't get me wrong, but I think the cinematography and the atmosphere and the gravitas that it gives Godzilla, like, it treats him like this, you know, God, this monster, it feels otherworldly. When they're descending into San Francisco in the final act of that movie, it feels like they're going into a world that doesn't belong to human beings anymore. There's a sense of awe to Godzilla in that movie that I love. And I enjoy the way it looks, I enjoy the fights and all that stuff. Kong Skull Island, I think, is a bit more middling. I think the humans, despite the fact that they try to make them cooler, actually feel worse almost, because they just have like no story, really. They have no arc. I mean, Kong and the fights are fine, but I didn't enjoy it anywhere near as much as the Godzilla movie, certainly. I don't hate it. It's just a fine movie, but I don't feel particularly strongly toward it, despite the fact that it's got a lot of good cast members in it. You know, on top of the obvious ones like Goodman and Samuel L. Jackson, you've got Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston. I really like Shea Wiggum, who's like a character actor who pops up in a lot of movies. He's in that. But it's just okay overall. Godzilla King of the Monsters, I was super hyped for because Ghidorah was going to be in it, and I was really excited about the prospect of that. And I was disappointed because it has such a different feel to it. I wish it still felt like the 2014 movie, but had Ghidorah in it, because that sounds amazing. What we got instead is actually still a lot of fun for the monster stuff. Whenever Godzilla, Ghidorah, Rodan, Mothra are doing stuff in that movie, I'm having a great time. The humans are maybe the worst they'd been at that point in any of those movies. They're the one-liners that the humans are firing out in that movie are terrible, but I still enjoy it as a kaiju B movie, if that makes sense. Which is, I guess, I think more often than not is what you tend to enjoy kaiju movies are. There's just a select few that are special. The original 1954 Godzilla is a special film that is more than that. And I think 2014's Godzilla, well, not as special as the original 54 Godzilla, obviously. I think from a filmmaking point of view, does feel a bit more special than the later movies. But King of the Monsters is still fun for the monster stuff. Humans are terrible. Godzilla vs. Kong's kind of in the same lines. It's got some fun Godzilla Kong fights and whatnot. I wish it kept some of the Godzilla score from that's one of the things that King of the Monsters did really well, actually, is it actually used the real Godzilla theme from the original movies, which I thought was cool. But the fights with Kong are cool. It's got some big fun moments. I enjoy overall what it was doing. But, you know, like, there's definitely, it's more of a schlocky B-movie thing that most of them have going for them. I just think Godzilla 2014 is a bit better than that, because I think it's got the gravitas and the filmmaking to look kind of special versus those. So overall, yeah, I enjoy these movies. I enjoy the universe, not as much as I wish that I would after the first movie, which I think is better than the rest of them. But I do think that it is mostly quite fun, and I enjoy monster movies. I think it helps that they're not pumping these out in the same frequency as like a Marvel movie, like universe pumping out superhero movies. They're, you know, like I say, it's been almost 10 years since that first one. They've had 4 movies total, about to be 5 next year. So it's not too much. So yeah, maybe I do have an appetite for a show set in this world, depending on what the quality's like. So with that said, what did I think of these first 2 episodes? Honestly, not bad. I don't think it's, you know, going to blow anyone away necessarily, but I think if you were hoping for a compelling enough story, I think the different timelines of, you know, having some stuff set in the 50s and having the characters in almost present day, again, 2015, investigating some of the stuff and sort of realizing what connections they have to that stuff in the 50s, I think that stuff's quite interesting. And as far as the humans go, and given that we're going to spend most of the time in this show with the humans, it's probably good to say that, yeah, this is actually a bit better than the humans have been in those movies. I think they probably are the best human characters we've had, based on these first 2 episodes. There's just a few key things they do in the writing to make the drama between the humans a bit more interesting, just right from the get-go. So that's good. From a writing perspective, what's interesting is I did not realize that Matt Fraction, who's a comic book writer, was involved with this. Even beyond that, I didn't even know this going into it, but I noticed in the credits at the end, the name Mariko Tamaki popped up as I think staff writer was the credit she had. But she's a comic book writer that I really like. People like Matt Fraction. I'm not a big Matt Fraction guy, but I know his name from comics. Mariko Tamaki did a great Supergirl comic. She has done a detective comics run that I really like. Like, I actually know who she is, and I was like, oh, That's kind of cool. So there's bizarrely some comic book writers involved in this show. So I think that's kind of cool. To get into the premise of the show, so there's two main parts of the timeline we're following. Given that I've watched 2 episodes, I also have a bit more insight into how they're going to treat the flashbacks a little bit. So the 50s timeline isn't necessarily going in order, right? So everything in episode 1 from the 50s is all 1959, and that goes in order in the episode. It's not jumping around willy-nilly. But likewise, the second episode stuff in the 50s is all from 1952. So we actually go back to the start of the story with those 50s characters in the second episode after what looks like maybe something towards the end of their story in the first one. But that could still, turn out to be not quite true, and maybe there's a lot more after that. But certainly it felt like maybe we're definitely much further down the line. We're 7 years later in the first episode versus the second episode. Whereas the 2015 story does seem to be playing out in order, which I think is smart. I think if both parts of the timeline were jumping backwards and forwards, that would probably be a little confusing to navigate. It would be a bit too much. I think having one that feels like the anchor, which is the 2015 story, always going in one direction, lets the other one sort of jump around a bit more and sort of explore things a little bit and sort of build up like who these characters in the backstory were. So the characters we have are Kate, who is the young woman in the 2015 portion of the show. She was in San Francisco on G-Day. That's something that's established quite quickly. And she's in Japan. She lives in San Francisco, but she's in Japan because her father has died or went missing, and she's there to settle some of his affairs because there's an apartment that, there's some keys that belong to him, and she's looking into that. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to just give the premise here, which is that she finds out that her father had another family. There's another wife and another son that she didn't know about, and that's quite awkward. But that leads us to those characters. The son, specifically Kintaro, is another main character here, and he has a very different opinion of this father figure than Kate does. Kate, was already kind of cold with her father, seemingly. Kintaro seemed to respect him and sticks up for him a lot more. So that sets up some of those characters. He knows May, played by Kiersey Clemons, who's like a how would I say a hacker necessarily? She's good with like, they go to her with like old 70s like film reels and audio tapes and computer data and things like that, and she's able to decipher it and put it through her system, and she's very knowledgeable with these kind of things. That's her character, and those are our 3 main characters in the 2015 portion. Kurt Russell, of course, eventually shows up. He doesn't show up until episode 2, but the older version of Shaw, which is his character, is also in 2015. So that's very much the main players that I'll say for now. There's a couple other sort of characters that I'll mention in spoilers, but that's the main players that we're dealing with in the 2015 portion. And then the 50s, you're dealing with a Japanese scientist named Keiko. Or maybe it was Keiko. I always say Keiko was how you pronounce it. I think it's similar to the character that's on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I think it's the same pronunciation. I could be wrong though. And then her husband character, named, who IMDb unfortunately doesn't have his name for me, the bastards. But his last name was Randa, which notably is the same as John Goodman's character in the King Kong movie. So that'll obviously be relevant. And John Goodman, and this is not a spoiler because it's literally the first scene, but the show opens with a John Goodman cameo. They show kind of like the end of his story on Skull Island from the movie, and it looks expensive but also really fake. It's kind of this weird thing where I don't know if they just had John Goodman in nothing but a room that was painted green, or they had John Goodman's head digitally put onto someone else's body. Maybe I'm just complimenting the fact that I think he's lost some weight, so he looked a bit different. But everything with him looked really fake at the start. It's the way it is. For they're not really on a jungle, they're not really on an island filming or anything like that, and it feels that way. Despite the fact that it looks very expensive for what it is, it just looks unnatural the entire time. So, minor quibble there, I would say. But I think generally speaking, the show looks expensive. It looks like, they've got a lot of expensive CG, they've got expensive locations, they've got a lot of stuff shot in what feels like the streets of Tokyo. Whether or not they shot there for real, I'm not sure, but it feels authentic enough. So Apple shows tend to feel like they've got a budget, and this does absolutely. Yeah, so you've got this character here, Randa, along with the Japanese science Keiko, and then their military escort is the younger version of Shaw, who's later played by Kurt Russell, but in this part of the timeline is played by Wyatt Russell, Kurt Russell's son. So you get this neat thing where they do actually look kind of alike. You can maybe buy that they are the same person with years apart, which is nice. You don't need that, but it is kind of nice. I noticed that Wyatt Russell, it felt like he was actually doing a little bit of a, I don't want to say an impression of his father, but it felt like the character had a little bit more sort of a cockiness and kind of charm that I'm used to seeing him playing. Like, it's almost like typically when I see Wyatt Russell, he's intentionally not trying to be his father, but because in this show he's meant to be the same character, he is playing up the mannerisms that his dad did when he was younger. So you're sort of feeling and seeing and hearing a little bit more Kurt Russell in his performance than you normally would, which is perfect for this because he's supposed to be Kurt Russell younger. I thought that was a cool choice, and it was kind of nice to see him sort of flex those muscles that I think he probably intentionally doesn't normally, because he doesn't want to just be pretending to be his dad when he's doing his own performances. But with this, it obviously makes sense for him to tap into that a little bit. So I enjoy this idea. There's a lot of stuff in the 50s, especially in episode 2, where Randa will be filming stuff in his old like camera, and it's like a 1950s like camera, so it looks like old. There's no sound. It's just this sort of the sound of the filming running, and you're seeing this 4:3 footage that's really grainy and flickery. Like, I really love that kind of aesthetic that they're going for, of like this like old stuff that they're discovering in 2015. Again, it's not quite present day, but it feels like it. It does make me wonder if they get more seasons, because this is billed as season 1, so there's a good chance that there could be more seasons of this if it's successful enough. I do wonder if that window of time is going to be very useful for saying, okay, well, season 2 doesn't have to pick up right away. It can jump to after King of the Monsters. It can jump to after Godzilla versus Kong, potentially. There's like a lot of other places or movies they can sort of set it around further down the line if they want to. But I don't know where this is going, so they might not want it. Maybe there is more story to just keep going with in 2015. It's entirely possible. So the whole plot kind of revolves around, like I say, these characters meeting each other in 2015, and also that a lot of data and stuff that John Goodman's character from Kong Skull Island threw into kind of the water in a pouch and is discovered close to present day, and this is something that the father of Kate and Kintaro had on him. So or I had in a safe, actually. They find it in a safe, right? Which is maybe a little spoilery, but I'm just kind of like, this is the basic setup stuff, and this is what gets all the plot going and ties them to Monarch and brings all this stuff in. So yeah, I think the biggest compliment I could probably give this, because obviously the glimpses of the monsters are fun, and them looking into things sort of fleshes out the world a little bit that the movies are supposedly operating in. I think what I really appreciated, though, is just the small moments that it actually tries to give these characters a little bit of weight, so they're not just fluffy characters. There's moments where you actually feel bad for some of the characters, or you sympathize with their feelings on the monsters or on stuff. I think particularly the family drama of this woman Kate discovering her father had this whole second family, and she now has this half brother, and there's this other woman that was also married to her dad. Like, a lot of that stuff and the drama that comes from that, I think, is handled quite well, to be honest. Particularly the second wife in Japan, who doesn't seem to speak English, at least not very well. Her not being able to understand what the conversation is, and like wanting to know, where her husband's been missing these past few years, and wanting answers, and seemingly being quite a nice, sweet woman, and wanting these answers but not getting them, is actually quite sympathetic. I think you feel bad for her. And when she's nice to Kate, and Kate's really standoffish because she kind of like hates the fact that her dad had this second life, you feel bad for her, and you feel like, how can you hate this woman, Kate? Come on, she's clearly innocent and sweet, and whatever shit you've got on your father, or whatever dad issues you've got, it's not on her. Like, it can't be on her, right? It's not her fault, or even his other son's fault that he had this second life. It's very much on him. it sets up that she doesn't really want to talk to her mum about all this. Her mum calls her repeatedly, and she sort of hangs up and whatnot. But anyway, I should probably stop talking about what happens in the episodes before I give the spoiler warning. It's an episode 1 and 2. Episode 1 especially is a lot of the setup of who these characters are, and there's some nice little details it fleshes out the world. I like that there's this like symbols of Godzilla like around in Japan, and it's like the evacuation sort of lines and like the directions where to go if there's a siren for a kaiju attack. This is where you go if Godzilla might show up. I kind of appreciate that. I thought that was a nice little bit of world building. I like seeing how the world has responded after something like Godzilla and like what's happened as a result. So I think I'll probably go to spoilers here. I will say, if you're a fan of the movies and if you like the idea of fleshing out the world a little bit, you might find something to enjoy here. I think the characters are probably better written than any of the movies have done, which is good because it's not going to have as much of the monsters. Like I said, you're talking like less than a minute in each episode of actual monster action so far. I suspect that it'll probably be a couple of episodes later in the season that have more because they'll be saving their money for a big showdown or something or whatever. But the glimpses there is of them is up to the quality of the movies. Like, it's not like they look cheaper because this is a TV show. But that's also why they can't show them too often, because it's very expensive to have them looking that good. So not bad, not bad. So I'll give spoilers here, and I'll talk about anything else I want to. So spoilers for episodes 1 and 2 of Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. I think one of the scenes that I like early on is when Kate arrives in Japan and she's in the taxi with this cab driver who starts talking about how, oh, you in the business of this, preventing monster attacks or damage prevention. It's a big business now. And she's quite cynical and says, oh yeah, everyone makes a profit from tragedy. And the guy basically says, yeah, but there's not really a tragedy though. San Francisco was faked. They did it with CGI. And I laughed out loud at that because it's kind of a meta joke because they literally did it with CGI. But I also, like this because this is like, we've already kind of got the sense that she was there. There's some quick glimpses of where she was. And we see later in the episode that she was on the bridge. So I assume it was the Golden Gate Bridge, just because it's the famous one. But the bridge in the movie where Godzilla goes through the bridge, she was on a school bus. She presumably is a teacher on the school bus with her kids. And she's trying to get them off the bus. And we see towards the end of the episode a full version of this scene where... And there is some new shots of Godzilla. There's a couple of shots that are definitely from the movie. But I'm pretty sure there's a few shots of her looking up at Godzilla and Godzilla looking down almost right at her when he gets hit in the face by a missile or two. That I'm pretty sure are new shots for the show. So, and it looked good. So I can't complain about the production value of that. But the bus falls in the water. Like, she gets off first and is trying to get the kids off. And the bus, like, because the bridge just gets, destroyed, the bus with all the kids in it just goes out of the water. So she's just watched all of her kids that she was supposed to be looking after die. So she has got some trauma. She's got some issues. We see that, of course, in episode 2 when someone from Monarch, Tim, I believe was the name, comes to ask questions about this data that they all seem to have. And they put a bag over her head and she starts freaking out instantly. And you see quick flashes of her time in San Francisco. And she kicks the driver, which makes the car flip. And she runs away. But, I thought they did a good job with introducing her character, and she's understandably miffed about her dad having this secret second life. Whereas Kentaro, the son in Japan, is a lot more defensive of him. He seems to respect his father and is like, hey, he wasn't a bad guy. His work was important. But it turns out that their father had this pouch of old, like, basically reels of data, because it's the 70s, right? This stuff came from John Goodman. So they take it to May, who is played by Kiersey Clemons, and is able to sort of get some data off it. And this actually, like, flags, it like pings back to Monarch, so they know someone's got this confidential data. And that's what sends Tim in episode 2. But they're looking at this, and she recognizes the symbol as of the soldiers who were, like, around the bridge at G-Day in the Godzilla movie. And she's like, oh, this is tied to what went down there. And for some reason, because we find out the dad didn't actually just, like, he's not confirmed dead, he's just missing technically. he decided not to come with her and his wife after G-Day. He gave like tickets and money and some stuff to Kate and said, "Hey, go take care of your mother." But he disappeared off on his own, and the only reports we have is that he was on a ship or a plane that disappeared near Alaska, and that's the last they know. Like, he's just missing from that. They don't know. There's a good chance he's still alive somewhere potentially. Like, in the real world, I'd say no, he's probably dead. But because it's a TV show, I'm like, oh, he's probably alive then. If there ain't no body and he's presumed missing or he's presumed dead, then he's probably alive somewhere. So he's probably going to have to explain to his daughter at some point why he has a separate family in life and all that, and that could be fun. Like I said though, like, I think the wife in Japan, Kintaro's mother, when she's like being really sweet, because the alarm goes off at one point for a kaiju attack, and it turns out to be a false alarm, and they just give the all clear. But everyone starts running, and Kate gets very scared, and it's, because she was quite near the apartment still, Kintaro and his mother sort of like find her, and the mother is like very calming with her, very comforting to her. And after the alarm's called off and they're walking back outside again, she invites her to tea and says, again, talking through her son, saying she wants to, you probably want to learn about your father's, life, and we want to know about your life. It turns out Kate actually speaks Japanese later in the episode. It's kind of revealed that she's been kind of lying about that, because she intentionally tries not to, because that was the language that her and her dad spoke. It was like their secret language almost. Because, she was living in the US, everyone was speaking English. The idea that our dad and her had like the secret language they could communicate in was a thing between them. And because she's got a problematic feelings when it comes to her dad now, she doesn't want to use that language anymore. So yeah, it makes enough sense in the context of like the character relationships. But anyway, what was I getting to with all of this setup is so it turns out their dad is the son of the woman in the 50s portion, right? The woman, Dr. Keiko, in 1959 and 1952 in episode 2, that woman is Kate and Kintaro's grandmother. So it's like, oh, okay, all right, so there's our connection. We've got our thing there. And seemingly their dad, was looking into Monarch. Was he ever a part of Monarch? I don't think we know that yet. Clearly he was looking into it. The fact that he had the files in a safe in secret implies it was a secret and he wasn't supposed to have them, so he probably wasn't officially part of Monarch, or at least wasn't anymore, I would suspect. But interesting connections and all that stuff there. Because they see their grandmother standing in a giant footprint that looks like a Godzilla footprint or something as big as Godzilla anyway. So that seems like a fun idea. Actually, no, it's not big enough for Godzilla. Now that I'm remembering, the Godzilla in this universe is so big versus everything else, it's probably just another Muto footprint, because they're much smaller than Godzilla, but still obviously very big to a human. But episode 2, it shows you the start of I'll get to the flashbacks in a bit. Episode 2, it's Tim from Monarch comes to Japan. He comes after Kate first, who, as I said, they put her in the car and the car flips. The police aren't going to help her. They just kind of tell her to go to the embassy. She's lost her passport. She's lost her money. They come after May as well, Kiersey Clemons' character, but she's sort of savvy enough to have avoided them. And she runs into Kate because Kate went there looking for help. And they're together. And then Tim and his henchmen eventually go to Kintaro's apartment. The mum runs enough interference that Kintaro is able to get away. So our 3 younger characters here, and they're not kids, they're all in their 20s or something, but you've got May, Kate, and Kintaro on their own now. And because Kintaro found a photograph of young Shaw, they go looking for him at this seemingly kind of like retreat for old people. Although when they actually talk to Kurt Russell, it turns out to be like a Monarch, let's not say prison, but just kind of like a place to keep him in check. He's got like one of those security bracelet things on his ankle, the people in house arrest have. And he's like, hey, we could sit around here and deal with Monarch's bullshit, or we could go. So the cliffhanger to the present day stuff at the end of episode 2 is Kurt Russell cutting off his bracelet and saying, let's go find out what happened to your dad. So he's like raring to go. So it's actually quite exciting that Kurt Russell is going to be teaming up with the young people to go and look into all this shit, because it's like, hey, obviously he's the star, he's a big guy from the 80s and 90s movies. It's actually quite exciting to see him have a prominent role in this. And because we didn't get him in episode 1 and he's not there until the end of episode 2, it was really fun that I was worried that it was going to basically be a cameo. Now, he's in the opening titles, so that seemed unlikely. But I thought, oh, maybe he'll be quite limited in screen time. But this actually feels like, no, he's going to be with them. He's going to be doing a lot of stuff with them. That's kind of fun. I'm up for it. That's good stuff. So, I think I appreciate that these characters don't all like each other very much. You know, Kate doesn't really like Kentaro. Kentaro keeps saying, why is she here? You know, they don't really like each other very much because they have very differing opinions of their father. But they're both united in the sense that they both want to know what happened to him. They both want to have answers for what he did and why he was doing this double life. So they've both got good motivation for it. Whereas Kiersey Clemons' character, May, just seems to be genuinely interested. There's a scene early on in episode 2 where it reveals that she's looking at the rest of the data because, I guess just because she wants to, because she's genuinely fascinated by it. Maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe there is a reason why she cares. But if there is, it's not been revealed yet. But they're all motivated to find out what happened. So as far as like a pair of first episodes goes to setting up the characters, it does a decent enough job of setting up why all these three characters, or maybe not why, but certainly why for two of them. For May, it's less why and more just that she is genuinely interested, is a little paranoid, and because Monarch are after them now, she doesn't trust that that'll go anywhere. She wants to like get answers to get away or whatever. So very curious to see how all that plays out. I think the other big thing to talk about in these first two episodes, and you know, because I'm putting them together, I'm rushing through some of the plot a little bit. I don't want to be sitting here all day, but we have to talk about the flashbacks from the 50s. The stuff from the first episode, which seems like Keiko might be dead at the end of it. But again, she sort of goes into an abyss with all these monsters. She could turn out to be alive, but it's the sort of thing where it feels like a big dramatic ending. In episode 1, they're in Kazakhstan in 1959. They mention they already have a kid, whereas Shaw says he doesn't want to have kids. But they're investigating basically a nuclear power plant that's been deserted. Kind of like, it looks very Chernobyl-esque when they get there. However, they point out that there's no radiation. They're expecting radiation, but there isn't. And, you know, we established in the movies that these mutos feed on radiation, so it's a good chance that the reason why there's not any is because they've been eaten all, for lack of a better term. So they find like a nest of like kaiju, of like bug-like beings. Of course, they want to get readings. They argue about it a little bit, but when they go down, there's more earthquakes. There's the ground's falling apart, and the eggs all hatch, and they come after them. And there's a big dramatic moment where Keiko's like climbing up the rope, but one's on her leg, and the rest of the bugs are all, and they're giant bugs, right? Because they're clearly going to grow into kaijus later. Or at least I presume they are anyway. They sort of like go around her, and eventually her husband, Rando, was it Rando? Randa, not Rando. I'm still learning all the names, alright? It's the first review. But he drops the rope, and, you know, that's what we end the first episode on, is her falling seemingly to her death with all these monsters. Again, there's room to reveal more with that, but it's interesting, though, that we go back to the start of their story for episode 1 in 1952. It's where they established that Shaw got into a fight with his fellow officers because they were harassing a local woman wherever he was stationed, and he gets shipped off on basically this crap duty, which is to be an escort to this Japanese scientist. You know, it sets up that he's a flawed character. He makes some sexist assumptions when he arrives. When he sees Keiko, he just assumes that's not who he's looking for. And when she says that her name's Keiko, he assumes that she must be the daughter of the doctor or scientist that he's there to escort. So it sets him off in kind of the wrong foot. But it's setting up that, yeah, he's got this old school attitude. He's the outsider. He's the American. And presumably he's going to have his mind and opinion opened up quite a bit through the course of their relationship, but also through the course of just everything he's going to see and witness. And it's when they're in the jungle, they run into Randa, who, this is the first time they're all meeting each other, Shaw actually ditches them because he doesn't want to take Randa with them on their expedition, and she wants him to come because she's realizing they have a lot of shared interest and that he's done his own research and they're comparing notes and all that. They're comparing the migration of some radioactive energy that's sort of going around every year, like it's like birds migrating or whatever. So Shaw leaves and whatever, but he ends up turning back when the Geiger counter starts going off the scales, and he sees like stuff in the sky. It's like lights in the sky effect. It's almost like the Northern Lights, but in like daytime kind of thing. So the whole big thing here, though, is that they find a ship. They find a ship from Pearl Harbor, or a ship that was lost near Pearl Harbor in 1943. So it's 1952 here at this point. So this is 9 years later. It turns out that Randa, this young Randa character who is going to eventually marry Keiko, was on this ship, and he is the sole survivor. And obviously they point out that this is a really far away place for this ship to be. It's 5,000 miles away from Pearl Harbor. How did it get here? And of course, I'm thinking, oh, because Godzilla or another giant monster like picked it up and swam with it or whatever, right? And sure enough, they get attacked in the ship at the end by a flying monster. There's kind of a nice callback here, actually, where when Shaw comes to rescue them and help them get out of the ship when it's been attacked by this big giant claw. And I did love this, actually. I love the shots of the big claw coming in. You don't get a full shot of what the monster is, which is this big sort of pterodactyl style thing, until the very end of the episode when they get out of the ship. But before that, you just see the claw coming in, these like hands and the claws and the talons coming in, and it just looks really fun and great. But there's a callback here because earlier on, Shaw was being a little dismissive and he was accusing Randa of hunting dragons. And at the end, when he sees this big pterodactyl style monster, he sort of goes, "Oh, you actually are hunting dragons." And that was a nice little callback. And this thing roaring is the end of episode 2, and that's the big payoff there. Yeah, honestly, like both the flashback stories were relatively fun. I think I enjoyed the second one a little bit more because there was an actual monster at the end. Which I guess I should probably go back and talk about the opening of episode 1, which is John Goodman recording a message and sending the tapes into sea. There's actually some kaiju monster there. The big spider with the thin legs is chasing him, and then this big crab monster rises up and starts fighting the spider. That's the big opening to episode 1. So they had a big bit of CG at the episode 1 opening. They had a little bit of Godzilla later on. And then the end of episode 2 has this big pterodactyl looking Muto that's screaming and attacking them. Which, you know, the big money moments are fun. But I think this show would fail completely if that's all it had to rely on. It needs the character drama and the mystery they're investigating to be... It needs that to work on its own. And for the most part, I would say it does. Like, I'm not saying it's the best mystery of all time yet, but it gives you the character motivations for these characters to look into what their father was involved in, how it ties into Monarch, how it ties into these monsters. You've got some good performances from some actors that I enjoy. You know, so far, I think it's got a lot of potential. I don't know if it's going to rise up and be a genuinely great TV show on its own, but it's got enough going for it that I don't think you can just dismiss it out of hand as just fluff tie-in material. It feels like it's got a little bit more going for it than that. That said, though, if it fumbles along the way and it doesn't have good payoff, or it doesn't feel like it's got its own conclusion by the end of the season, maybe it will just feel like a tie-in. I think that's kind of up in the air, but it's got enough potential and enough going for it right now that I'm definitely along to see more and see where it takes us. The fact that I'm looking forward to the next movie probably helps fill in some of the hype a little bit and puts me in the mood to watch it. I was excited to watch this today and see what it was like. So I'm down. I think it helps as well that the episodes aren't too long. There was a real danger of this being like 60 plus minutes every episode. Both episodes 1 and 2 are about 45 minutes, which feels just right. It's not overstaying its welcome. It's paced quite well. I think I will enjoy just having one episode next week. I think the only downside I had was that I did feel a little restless in episode 2. Not because episode 2 was any worse than 1. If anything, it's the stronger of the two. It's just that watching them back to back, it made me feel the length a little bit. But obviously, week to week, that won't be a problem. I think this will be an entertaining week of TV when it's one a week, which is what we're getting starting next week. So I'm fairly optimistic at this point, and I think I'm really enjoying the teases and the mystery, and obviously the glimpses we get of the monsters. Obviously, I would love to see some actual Godzilla before the end of the season, and maybe they'll give it to us. I'm not sure. That said, though, it's set in 2015, and I don't think Godzilla was supposed to have been seen between 2014 and then King of the Monsters. I think he was meant to be dormant during that period. It's been a while since I watched them, so I don't remember that for sure. So maybe we won't see any Godzilla, but who knows? Maybe we'll see him in the 50s. Maybe these characters will get a glimpse of them or something. I'd have to go back and see what Ken Watanabe knows about Godzilla in the first movie. Maybe some of the stuff he knows will come directly from these characters. I mean, he mentions 1954 when he's talking about Godzilla, which is obviously in the movie a reference, at least in a meta way, to the original movie from 1954. And given that we're in the 50s with these characters, maybe they're going to go to Japan after 1954's Godzilla stuff happens, and maybe we'll see some of that from their perspective and how it fits into this universe's timeline. That'd be cool. I'd be into that. But yeah, let me know what you thought of the show if you've tried out the first couple episodes. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Helps out a lot if you do. More people will find the channel. And of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble. The other channel we have is Mail Fuzz Movies, and there's a sci-fi movie podcast on there, the Atomic Cinema Experiment, which is where we actually reviewed all of these movies before. You can find all those over there. Find that in podcast feeds as well if you want. But I'll be back next week with episode 3, and we'll take it from there. But check out any of the reviews if you're interested in A Murder at the End of the Worlds, the FX show that I'm reviewing right now. Plus, we do some classic TV show reviews. I've been reviewing X-Files, which I've never seen before. I've been reviewing Person of Interest. So just in case you're new to the channel, that's some of the things that we're doing week to week right now. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?